Now, this took place a couple years ago. I kind of don't really remember this too much, but it happened to a friend of mine who used to live in the same area as me until she moved back later on in 2013. We'll call her by the name Teresa. Teresa was having a sleepover and invited two of her best friends, and they lived on the other side of Barry, so honestly, she was living there at the time of the story. While she was living with her friends, she did have a sleepover at least one weekend in the summer. It was around mid-late summer, so I guess it was around late August, maybe. Maybe mid to late August. I can't honestly remember. Teresa and her two friends always really enjoyed the backyard. They had a really great time, and they even really had fun by watching movies and stuff. However, she was 14 at the time of the story, so she, along with her friends, decided they would go for a walk and decide to see what's going on in the neighborhood. They have walked around neighborhoods before, and she knew everything from the back of her head. However, when they continued to walk around the neighborhood, they noticed something was really odd. Now, Teresa wasn't so sure, but there was this one house that looked like it had been abandoned for years. What was really weird about it was that the lights were on the inside. It looked as if the yard had been abandoned, but kind of not at the same time. It was an old rundown home, so in the house that must have been maybe a couple years old. Teresa and her friends used to joke about stuff, and Teresa did remember there was this one grumpy neighbor that used to give her and her friends a hard time. Now, I can't remember the neighbor's name, but he was a really grouchy old man who did not take kindly to pranks or even jokes for that matter. I'm not sure what his deal was at the time, but let's just say he was in his mid-70s and he didn't really like it when people prank him. Now, Teresa and her friends decided that they would prank this neighbor's house, so they went up to the door and did something called Ding Dong Ditch. Yeah, common thing a lot of people play, but it was really popular, especially back before the internet became the thing. Teresa and her friends knocked on his door before running out of sight, and that's when the old man looked around and said, "Hello? Anyone there?" As soon as he said that, he saw no one and walked back in. Teresa and her friends went to do the ding dong ditch again. Then the old man came out and asked, "I wonder who's knocking." They went up there again, but just as they were about to knock on the door, the old man came out holding a gun and telling them to get off the property or he will shoot any of them down. Teresa and her friends ran out of that area and they headed back home. They had told the parents about what happened while they were out, but of course the parents were not really happy with Teresa and her friends for doing ding dong ditches, but they called the police just to make sure. However, though, the police arrived at the neighbor's house, but there was no one there. There was no sign of that man anywhere. The police had said that they could not find him anywhere, and he said that it looked as if he must have got away. However, a police patrolled the area street where Teresa lived on that night, just to make sure if that man did come back, he would give some questioning. However, though, that was when Teresa had moved after that sleepover. It was some time before school started when they moved, so they honestly have no idea if that man was still living in that house or not. But just be thankful that that man did not kill Teresa or her friends. Because if he ever did open fire, this would have ended on a whole different note. For a bit of context, this actually happened to a friend of mine named Rachel when she was about 17. Now, this took place in 2010, so Rachel was having a sleepover with at least a friend of hers, which we'll call her Nicole. Nicole and Rachel had been friends for a while now, And however, they had sleepovers at Rachel's place, but one day Rachel decided to sleep over at Nicole's house. Now, most of the time, they would have sleepovers, but however, with Nicole's place, there was something really odd that Rachel couldn't even describe. Something was really strange about Nicole was that she really liked these kind of dolls called porcelain dolls. Now, to give it a little bit of a description, Nicole had been obsessed with porcelain dolls since she was a child, probably around 7 or 8 years old. It's not that Rachel had an issue with it, but she found them really creepy. Now, this took place in 2010, around October, when school was already let out for a month now. Rachel went over to Nicole's place for a sleepover, and the girls seemed to have enjoyed themselves by having some fun, watching a movie, etc. However, as they were continuing on with their own thing, they ended up deciding to go to bed after watching another movie, which happened to be called Titanic. After they had finished up their movie, they ended up going into their sleeping bags. Well, not really sleeping bags, but blankets and that in the bed in the living room, and they went to sleep. However, it wasn't until maybe about a few minutes later when Rachel got up to use the bathroom. She looked to her left to see that there was a porcelain doll in the china cabinet that happened to be the one that Nicole always used to talk about. She named her porcelain doll Luna, as it was a really nice name. However, Rachel kind of started feeling uneasy about the porcelain doll, but she decided not to let it ruin her day and continued on. However, though, when she walked out of the bathroom, she noticed the porcelain doll moved a few inches to the left. It wasn't exactly right at the same spot. It was inside the china cabinet, but it only moved maybe about 4 or 5 inches from its original spot. Thinking that Nicole moved it, but however, how would that be possible since Nicole was asleep? Rachel went to bed when all of a sudden she heard what seemed to be the china door opening. She ended up looking up to find out if it was Nicole, but she was still a heavy sleeper, and someone or something had really opened it up. She at first thought that it could have been Nicole's parents, but they were both in bed too, so there was no way that it could be them. So Rachel decided to go to sleep, but when she woke up, at least around 3 in the morning, at least a few hours later, she ended up seeing the porcelain doll was facing her, lying on the floor. With some very shrieking scream that Rachel did, she honestly grabbed the doll and chucked it out of the window. Nicole woke up and asked her what was all the screaming. Of course, Nicole's parents did as well, but of course, Rachel ended up saying that she had a nightmare. The only reason why she said that was because she didn't want to tell them the truth about the porcelain doll. Obviously, the parents would think that Rachel was imagining things or something, so it was why Rachel ended up saying that it was just something else and not the porcelain doll. Before Nicole woke up, I think around 7 in the morning, Rachel went outside where she chucked the doll, all that was possessed earlier, in the garbage. And honestly, she made sure to hide all evidence in broken pieces just to make it look like that it had been in the trash and not out. That was the last time that Rachel ever slept over at Nicole's place and never did that again. She still has some of this paranoia every time she sees porcelain dolls. She's not sure how that doll managed to move by itself, but she still has that fear of porcelain dolls to this day. She's now in her 30s, and honestly, she has never touched a porcelain doll since that day, and she doesn't even know if that porcelain doll was paranormal, real, or somebody pranking her. She did not even want to stay around that house to find out. Nicole did ask her a few times about the porcelain doll, her name was Luna, but Unfortunately, they just dismissed it as she was given away by her parents, as Rachel didn't want to tell her what she did with the doll, afraid that that would spike up some friend drama or something much worse. Now, this is one of the reasons why Rachel has never bought porcelain dolls, and she still gets this chill to this day, and it feels like the doll was looking into her soul. However, though, she's not even sure what to think or make of this. For some context, this actually happened to what happened to be a coworker of mine when she did sleepovers. Her name was Chanel, and this took place back in 2006 when she was around 8 years old. Chanel had a bunch of sleepovers and even went to a couple of them. However, she had a sleepover with what happened to be one of her best friends named her friend's name was Mavis, and she was at least a year older than Chanel, but they were very good close friends. Chanel, along with Mavis, were pretty much having a sleepover at Mavis's house. Keep in mind that Mavis has a really huge backyard that is actually a forest, as there is no fencing around it. This time at night, they usually would go in the forest to play flashlight tag, and most of the time, they don't really seem to have a problem. However, Mavis along with Chanel decide to have a bigger sleepover and invite at least 2 more of their friends. The other 2 were around Mavis's age, to which Chanel never had a problem with. Chanel's other friends, along with Mavis's friends, one of them's names was Kate and Abby. Kate and Abby were sleeping over for the first time at Mavis's place, as they really enjoyed it a lot. But however, this time, they were sleeping over at Chanel's place for the first time. With the big forest around, Chanel and her friends decided they would play flashlight tag in the woods, and first off, it started very well when they all went in the forest. However, Mavis was the one who was going to find everybody, and they all ran as far as they could to find some good hiding spots while their flashlights were in hand. This was before phones had built-in flashlights, so you could definitely see a lot of differences in that. At this time, though, Chanel was hiding in one of the best places when she ended up hearing what seemed to be someone crying. She honestly was confused, thinking that maybe there was someone crying, but none of her teammates or hiders were in sight or near her. And she honestly couldn't see Mavis finding them, as she was far away looking for her friends. That's when Chanel decided to go and investigate the crying. When she got closer to what she could describe, she saw that there was a woman wearing pajamas. She looked like she was maybe 18, and she looked very sad. Honestly, she continued to cry. This is when Chanel asked the girl if she's okay and if she needed help. But obviously, that was not the case, as the woman did not reply. Chanel got closer to see if maybe the woman needed help and that she could bring the woman back to her house so they can call the cops and figure out what happened. However, just as Chanel went further, she ended up looking down to see that this woman was not real. She looked like a mannequin doll, like one of those dolls that you for mannequin that display clothing, and that crying was on a loop. Chanel obviously heard twigs and branches snapping and looked to see that there was at least 4 or 5 men carrying axes and guns. Honestly, Chanel ended up running back the way she came. Of course, some fire shots from the gun were shot, but luckily they had missed her. Eventually, when Chanel went back into Mavis's house, she found all the girls were there, and even the parents and the police were there as well. Chanel unfortunately was confused and didn't even know what was going on, but the police said that there had been a group of serial killers in the forest, luring people, including children, for kidnapping, murder, robbing, etc. Honestly, the police searched the forest, but they couldn't find those men. Even with Chanel explaining the best details with them having guns and axes, they did not find those men. Chanel is still not sure today if they even got away or they were caught years later. Chanel never had sleepovers at her place anymore with those woods due to the fact that she gets really uncomfortable, especially with the fact that there had been so much going on that she's not even sure what to think. Honestly, this was really an experience, but however, Chanel really still fears frightful that whoever those men were probably had not good intentions, and if she stayed any longer, then God only knows what could have happened to her.